equivalents. We're fundamentally different societies. We're fundamentally different types of people in the way that we view the sanctity of life. We view it as sacred. They view death as sacred. I mean, this fundamental disparity between Israel and people who, are aligned more with the Muslim Brotherhood view of jihadist Islam is really like light and darkness, night like day and night, and it's very difficult as a practical matter to be blind to that disparity and then have a rational discussion about the war. So I think that when you look at sort of the grounding assumptions on which the entire discourse of the war is predicated, and you realize that they're fundamentally flawed from a moral perspective and from a practical perspective, then you understand that a lot of the discussion that we've had about the war itself is just sort of blind to the basic realities of the situation. And that, to me, is the ground zero of all of the problems in the discourse about the war. I mean, we don't want to kill people. We don't want to be at war with our neighbors. We're peace-seeking people. We've done, even silly things, even stupid things, even irresponsible things in our ardent desire to live at peace with our neighbors. It's all we ever want is peace. And on the other hand, they teach their children that their greatest aspiration should be the annihilation of the Jewish state and the
رجالنا على أهبة الاستعداد تقدما واستعدادا للموت واستعدادا لاقتحام السلك بإذن الله سبحانه وتعالى. نحن خلقنا هنا في غزة لنحطم.
Our soldiers in Gaza, they come in the height of the war last year. They were, entering into these apartment buildings. And I remember this one, and it wasn't rare. It happens every day. You have pictures of Mein Kampf and copies of Mein Kampf. You have all of this Nazi literature, all of this annihilationist, anti-Semitic literature, posters, etc. And they found an iPad that belonged to a teenage girl, in this apartment. And they turned it on, and her screensaver was Adolf Hitler. I have teenage boys, and they're interested in all kinds of it. I have one boy who loves the NFL, and everything is NFL, and the other one loves soccer, and everything is Messi. Who would think of putting Adolf Hitler as their screensaver? But I mean, it's indicative of the nature of a society that's been deformed by indoctrination and constant drumbeat of annihilationist hatred of Jewish people and of Western civilization that they get everywhere in Gaza. When you internalize that, and anybody looking at what happened on October 7th, really, it's like, how could you not see that? The whole discussion of the war seems irrelevant to actual realities on the ground.
Let me tell you how I've heard it described. Israel has been so dominant and so destructive, and so some people have even used the term genocidal, right, towards the Gazan people. That's the reason that there might be a Hitler screensaver or something like that. Like, how do you respond to that kind of?
This is fundamentally false.
And infrastructure. That's statement did not make clear how much land Israel intended to seize, or whether the move represented a permanent annexation of territory. The Israeli military had already issued evacuation warnings to people living around the southern city of Rafah and towards the city of Khan Yunis. This comes as Israel killed a senior Hezbollah terrorist in Lebanon yesterday. Russia's investment envoy might visit the United States. The Kremlin says it's for talks with members of the Trump administration. He would be the most senior Russian official to visit since Moscow invaded Ukraine in 2022. Meanwhile, in Russia, one of the largest rounds of conscription to the country's military for several years is underway. Russia will see 160,000 men join the country's armed forces. That's 10,000 more than last year's increase, and a rise of more than 15,000 compared to 3 years ago. This comes as Russia and Ukraine accuse each other of launching new attacks on energy facilities. Such attacks would be in violation of a temporary ceasefire arranged by the U.S. Both sides now say they're providing details of the alleged violations to the U.S. The death toll from last Friday's massive earthquake in Burma has surpassed 3,000. The 7.7 magnitude quake toppled thousands of buildings, collapsing bridges and splitting roads. Burma state media reported more than 4,600 people were injured. The number of casualties is expected to rise.
To Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, maybe there's another nuance here, which is that it's just quite simply, Israel has been in control of the area for a long time and has been able to impose its will on the area in some significant manner, and that is the problem, right? Like that's unfair, that's unreasonable.
Well, that's how it's characterized.
Right.
But it's not true. Israel hasn't been in control of Gaza, or wasn't in control of Gaza since 2005, when Israel withdrew lock, stock, and barrel from Gaza. We expelled 8,500 Israelis who lived in flourishing communities in Gaza, in northern Gaza and along southern Gaza, along the area that Israel currently controls to prevent smuggling. And we withdrew them. We destroyed the communities. We withdrew all of our military forces, including from the international border between Gaza and Egypt. And we said, take over. Here's your Palestinian state. Why don't you, turn this into Singapore? They were given billions and billions of dollars in international aid money from the United States, from other Western countries, and from the countries of the Middle East. And rather than do what we were hoping that they would do, rather than turning Gaza into Singapore along the lines that President Trump has sort of laid out in his plan and his vision for post-war Gaza, they turned Gaza into Afghanistan with 450 miles of subterranean tunnels that exist for the sole purpose of attacking Israel. They took all of the building materials, they took the money, and rather than build Gaza up, they built an underground Gaza, the preconceived notion of which was to be used as the most entrenched enemy encampments and battle stations in history. You're talking about a regime of the Palestinians under Hamas that is dedicated solely not to the building of a state, but to the annihilation of the Jewish state. And everybody thought, so many people thought, the consensus opinion of the international community, led by the United States, was just give them the opportunity. If you leave Gaza, if you give it to them, say, here, the first time ever that Palestinians have had full sovereignty over anything. There's never been a Palestinian state. They had all of Gaza. Build. You want a state? Start here. Who knows where it will lead? But here, make your lives good. We're going to give you all of the ability to do that. Billions and billions of dollars. Israel left. It'll let you take your goods to market through Israel. If you want, you can build a port in Gaza. All of these things that were on the table, being discussed, people were willing to fund them. And all of this stuff they took. And they built a death factory. And they indoctrinated their people. Not to want to build a state, but to want to annihilate the Jewish state.
Given everything you've just told me, is it even possible to win this war somehow militarily?
Yes, it is. It's possible to win this war militarily by, A, destroying their ability to conduct war, which we mainly did. But now, what we're seeing now in terms of Hamas's reorganization as a military organization is much more along the lines of a guerrilla warfare operation than a standing army. There was a standing army that invaded Israel on October 7th. They had air cover with their missiles, they had drones, they had ground forces, they had a navy that invaded Israel from the beaches, and they were organized in brigade units that were centrally commanded by Chief of Staff of the military forces, Mohammed Def. So they had organized as military force, and that military force was largely destroyed, and now we're facing more of a guerrilla organization. So from that perspective, we conducted a military operation that destroyed their military, and now we're going after them in a more of a counterterrorism offensive. The question of the way the enmeshment of Hamas with the people of Gaza, who share the same ideological sensibilities that Hamas does and seeks the same goals that Hamas does. Well, how do you do that? I mean, the same way as Prime Minister Netanyahu said repeatedly that the German people became disabused of the notion that Nazism was going to get them somewhere good. And so by showing them that the only thing that they get from being with Hamas is death and destruction, and giving them an alternative, which is what the Trump plan does, which is, you have this opportunity to build a life in a different place. Gaza will be rebuilt, and you can return, if you're willing to sign onto this deal, to a place that is humane, that seeks peace, that wants a different future, that is building a different future, if you wish, and otherwise stay where you've relocated to. And that's how you achieve the goals of this war. You have to change the internal calculation. So when you have a discourse that says, hey, Israel's guilty of genocide, everything that Israel does is an illegal act, Israel isn't even the moral equivalent of Hamas, Israel is worse than Hamas, what kind of incentive are you giving the people of Gaza to walk away from Hamas? You're not. You're incentivizing them to stay with Hamas. You're rewarding their bad behavior by saying that the people that they just, carried out a one-day Holocaust against on October 7th and continue to aspire to do it over and over and over again, as they repeatedly claim or proclaim, you're saying, good for you. We appreciate you. We think what you're doing is fantastic. And we agree with you that the Jewish state is evil. So when you have that kind of discourse, not giving them any reason to walk away from this death factory.
Oh, Caroline Glick, it's such a pleasure to have had you on.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and I've been a long fan of your work, Jan. I think you're doing extraordinary things here, and I congratulate you and Epic Times and all your colleagues.
Thank you very much.
Become a political court. So in recent years, it has become not a neutral legal court, but a political court. And this was most clearly shown by the decisions regarding Israel.
And Netanyahu thanked Orban for leaving the ICC, making Hungary the first country in the European Union to do so.
You've just taken a bold and principled position on the ICC, and I thank you, Victor. This is not only important for us, it's important for all democracies. The ICC directs its actions against us, fighting a just war with just means, and of course not against our tormentors.
In a statement, the ICC presidency expressed concern about Hungary's decision and urged it to stay committed to the ICC's founding agreement. Meanwhile, in the war in the Gaza Strip, Israeli forces have now taken over Rafah in the southern Gaza Strip. On Thursday, hundreds of thousands of residents fled from the city, many of whom ended up in nearby Khan Yunis.
I am telling you, I was packing my belongings with the plane hovering over our heads. Until when will this continue? Until when?
But even Khan Yunis isn't free from Israeli airstrikes. Residents were seen inspecting the aftermath of an Israeli airstrike that hit an area filled with tents.
Why is Netanyahu expanding the operation? What is the operation he is expanding?
And it appears that residents in the Gaza Strip continue to ask how long the war will continue and why it's happening without mentioning the hostages that are still being held in the Gaza Strip. And that is what Israeli officials continue to repeat as the reason for the operations. Might the residents be afraid to mention the hostages because of possible retaliation from Hamas? According to a post on X from the official account from the State of Israel, a 22-year-old Palestinian man who recently participated in the protest in Gaza was tortured and killed, and his body was left at his family's doorstep. Jason Perry, NTV News.
Widespread